Break this down because I'm going to tell you what day we're not going to have class. I am honoring my part of the bargain, and on the 15th of November, which is a Friday, we are not going to meet as a class. So I'm giving you guys that day off, the 15th of November. What's that?
The day before my sister's wedding.
How about that? Could the timing be any better? So you're going to have that day off from class. Congratulations. Guys, the other thing too, if you have not yet submitted your Chapter 4 assignment, please do so. I'm hoping to dig into grading on those tomorrow. It's been a busy week. Guys, our next assignment is going to be due on the 11th of November, and I'm giving you two options. You can pick two options for this assignment. Your first is the option of reading an article in the New York Times about the United Auto Workers. And basically this article is about why the Tennessee plant for Volkswagen several times chose not to organize. So I'm asking you can either read that article, or for exercise B, you could commit this to paper. A friend you work with has posted a social media announcement about a gathering to hear from a union official about organizing your workplace. Would you respond like or unlike on the post, or not, and why? So you have two options for the assignment. The first is to answer 4 questions about an article about why the Tennessee plant for VW did not organize. Or you can tell me why you would like or not respond to a social media post about forming a union at your workplace. Why or why not? I know between those two assignments the one I would pick, but I'm encouraging you to pick the one that calls to you that's due by the 11th. So we've got lots of notice on this. No late assignments would be great. Guys, we left off talking about the ways that unions actually organize. We have something called voluntary recognition. And what that means essentially is that the employer is saying, we know you guys want a union, we're going to accept this, we're going to allow you to form a union. Now they still will probably ask for what they refer to as a card check. And that means, for example, we want to see, do we have a substantial part of the union? Does a majority of the people who work here actually want this union? If so, yeah, then we can basically say, okay, we're not going to call in the National Labor Relations Board, we're just going to recognize you. What might that indicate about the relationship between the union and the employees? This side of the room. What might that indicate about the relationship if we don't need to go to the NLRB? If an employer, Avery, if the employer is just saying, sure, you can have a union, what kind of relationship does that imply? Yeah, I would too. And in fact, in this kind of situation, you'd almost be asking, well, if it's that easy of a relationship, why do these guys feel a need for a union in the first place? That might be a good question. It could just be cultural. If you're in the Northeast, it could be people who said, my dad was in a union, my mom was in a union, we're going to form a union. This is a very uncommon situation. The only company I can think of who might have had a similar approach to this might have been Volkswagen. Because when Volkswagen essentially said, hey, look, we support our employees unionizing if they want to. If you want to have a successful drive, having what we refer to as neutrality agreements, and what that means, for example, you get something in writing from your employer that says, we're not going to put out anti-union propaganda, we're not going to make people sit through union speeches. If you've got that kind of relationship with your people, again, I question if you even need a union, but in these kinds of situations, too, the employer might even say, okay, here's a list of all our employees, here's a list of all their addresses, go to town. And even in this case, too, sometimes employees and employers even agree on how long they're going to allow the drive to go on, when they're going to actually end negotiations, all of these things. Guys, I want to walk through how there are 3 options, typically speaking, and how employees and employers negotiate on unions. I apologize, the print is small, it's right out of our textbook. We're going to cover this one step at a time so you guys can see the difference between these 2. I don't want to say this is not exciting, but it is a little linear. We're going to walk through it so you can see what the differences are in the arrangements. Is that a creative way to say something's boring? It's a little linear. Yeah, it's like kind of like saying it's a little not interesting. I wasn't lying to you. I was writing fiction with my mouth. So I love that. All right, you guys, let's walk through this. There are 3 scenarios in which employees and employers can come to a union. We're going to talk through these. Okay, and again, I apologize, the print is small. At the top, we're talking about where the interest is coming from. The interest can come from 1 of 2 places in forming a union. It comes internally. What does that mean? If it's internal to the company, what does that mean? Who's asking for the union?
Employees in
Employees are saying themselves, we want a union. If it's coming from an external source, who is that likely?
The union contacted the employee.
Could be an organizer, could be somebody from national or regionals who are saying, hey, this is a good idea, guys. So the interest can come from either place. Now, there are several ways in which we can get recognized. The first one we just talked about was voluntary recognition. So if the union basically is saying to the company, people have organized outside of work, they've signed cards that say, I have intent to join a union, and the majority of people are saying, we want a union, and the employer says, okay, I hear what you're saying, we're good to go. That immediately goes from this scenario down to what we refer to as bargaining in good faith. It's a direct line. Here's what I want you to know about this diagram. Feel free to even write it on a diagram. This hardly ever happens. Why? Yes? That's exactly right. I can't think of too many companies who are going to say, oh, wow, you mean I'm going to have to pay you more, go through more layers of organization to talk to you and negotiate with you every 3 years? Sign me up. This sounds great. I love red tape and bureaucracy. Nobody's going to say that except for maybe companies who are very used to that environment. Then we get into the second scenario, and this is called the Giselle Doctrine. Don't worry too much about that term. We're going to tell you what that means. Here's the deal. On scenario number 2, this means that the company itself has been making such threats and making such an unfair work condition, what we refer to as a hostile environment. That's really one of the technical terms unfair labor practices abound. It could mean, for example, that they fired people who tried to organize. It could mean that they have told people they're going to lose their jobs if they organize. They've gotten in so deep with this stuff that somebody working at the company has reported them to the National Labor Relations Board. If you have that extreme of a situation, you literally can go straight to being organized. So if you're able to prove to the National Labor Relations Board that you were kept from being able to rationally organize, they can ratify your union with a snap of a finger and say, yes, you're allowed to have a union because obviously you need one. So these are the two extreme situations. We've got one where the employer is laying down and saying, uncle, you can have a union. And the second scenario in which the union is basically forced by the NLRB. Yes?
the company won't be punished.
The company can be punished, absolutely. And there's a couple ways the company can be punished. A company that doesn't want a union, for example, sees the union as punishment already. You're changing the way I operate. You're telling me how I can and can't operate. And there also can be things like fines. For example, if you fired somebody and you were breaking the law by firing them, you can be forced to reinstate them. You can be forced to pay the back pay with interest. You can be basically put under a situation where somebody from the NLRB, National Labor Relations Board, will be coming in periodically to check your operations. All those kinds of punishment can be levied. We'll talk more about that in a later chapter, but you can absolutely be punished. Good question. Other questions before we continue? So we got, anybody remember the story of the 3 bears? How did the 3 bears go? The bowls of porridge. There were 3 kinds of porridge. What happened? Well, you guys like fairy tales when you were kids. What was the story of the 3 bears?
Yeah, it's the one with the porridge, right? Where it's like
Porridge.
the first one was.
First of all, what the hell is porridge? It's oatmeal, right? I always thought it was oatmeal.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's oatmeal. You get 3 bowls of oatmeal there.
And
Quick
the
race.
one was too hot, the other one was too cold, and then the other one was just right.
Exactly right. So right here, here's what we got. We got too cold here in terms of people saying this is too easy. We got too hot in terms of the companies making it too hard. And we have a big, heaping, delicious bowl of typical bargaining processes, aka just right. Now, that's not to say it's simple. There are complications to this, but here's how it typically works. First, if you're going to have a secret ballot election, what this means is that you've been organized. You've been meeting outside of work. You've been talking to your friends in the company and saying, do you want a union? Well, the magic number is we have about 30% of the rank and file who have signed cards saying, yes, we want a union. And you can file for a petition. And that means you can file with the National Labor Relations Board to come in and give you permission to have an election. Well, the NLRB, once they get this contact from a union organizer, basically goes back and tries to investigate, are you doing things correctly here? Number 1, are you asking for the right union to come into your shop? Why is that a concern? Why might that be a concern? It's a complicated question, and I'll give you an answer on it. Guys, the United Steelworkers, by the name of the United Steelworkers, what industry would you guess they represent? Steel. Well, I know that part wasn't a trick question. Here's where it gets tricky. There are people who work in the shipping business in Erie, in Lake Erie, who are also members of the United Steelworkers. Does that make sense? Because there are shipping unions too. So why are these guys members of the United Steelworkers? Any guesses? Yeah. That's exactly right, because steel was such a core part of that industry, shipping steel across Lake Erie, that basically at some point the NLRB determined, yes, that union has jurisdiction in this case in that instance, yes.
I'm reading a lot about the history of the United Steelworkers, because they provide a lot of information about where I work, is how many different small unions have come together from and like merged or have been overtaken by the United Steelworkers. Like Agco Brands mainly deals with paper factories and stuff like that, but yet they're part of the United Steelworkers.
Yeah.
So I was reading, I'm like, why is that? And that's because they, I'm forgetting the word, but they basically brought in the paper unions because they were too small of representation. And
that's a question of jurisdiction too. The NLRB at some point can say, well, it makes sense because you're in a related industry, or in terms of doing that based on financial merit. I don't know what the NLRB's logic was there, but they had some kind of logic to be able to tie that together. But you're going to decide on jurisdiction in this case. Are you petitioning the right union? And the other part, what if we already have a union in place? Are they covering people who aren't currently covered? I'll give you an example. There's one particular type of profession that always has to be represented by its own union, and its members cannot be members of another union and an organization. Any guesses as to what type of profession always has to have its own union, if they're unionized? Let's paint a picture for you, and we'll go back to the diagram. Let's say, for example, all of us were members of a teachers' union, and we decided to go on strike here at St. Francis. Who's maintaining order? If things got heated, who are they going to call? Not Ghostbusters. That's tomorrow. Who are they going to call? They have lights on their vehicles. Some of them carry guns. Yeah, they're going to call the police or security. If you have police or security as part of your organization, they cannot be a member of your main union. They have to be neutral to some extent. Why is that? Any thoughts? Let's say we're striking, for example. We're all members of the National Education Association. Corey works as a police officer here. Is he going to come out and treat us the way he's going to need to treat us to break us up, or is he going to be nice to us? What are you going to do, Corey? We're in the same union.
I'll be nice.
He's going to be nice to them. And that's exactly why the police and security have to have their own unions. So let's get back on this, guys. So in the third, the just right election, we have the union members who basically, or the soon-to-be union members who have filed their cards and said to their employer they want a union. They filed with the National Labor Relations Board, who is asking, are you going for the right union? Was your petition timely? Is this 6 months old, or is this within the last 30 to 45 days? That's the key number, too, 30 to 45 days. Are you asking for the appropriate bargaining unit? In other words, are you including managers in here, or are you guys just rank and file? Is this appropriate? Is there at least 30% of employees who have filed interest cards? If you have less than 30%, the NLRB is probably going to say no way. If you're at 25%, too low. If you're at 29%, too low. It's got to be 30%. And when do you want to have this election? Then you can decide what kind of election you're going to have. You're generally going to have what we refer to as a secret ballot election. So that's decided in this area. So if the two parties agree, if the company and the employees agree, yes, we want a secret ballot, yes, this is when we're going to do it, this is how we're going to do it, we make sure that we have the appropriate bargaining unit. Are the right people voting? Are managers voting or not? Because if you're management, you typically can't be a part of it. What kind of ballot are you going to have? You're going to have an electric ballot or a paper ballot. A lot of places still use paper. When is it going to be, and who's eligible to vote? There's an exception, for example, of one kind of person who cannot vote in a union election, even if they're part of the rank and file. What might be somebody, not a police officer, not a security guard, Is there somebody who maybe is not eligible to vote because of a conflict of interest? Let's say Jason owns the company, and I'm Jason's son. Do I have a conflict of interest in voting? Yeah, I'm not going against my dad. I'm voting against this election. As a result, I don't have a right to vote. You have to disclose conflicts of interest for that reason. Plenty of people don't, but you're supposed to. So that's when we determine voter eligibility. At that point, from the time you file this petition with the NLRB, you got between 30 and 45 days to get it done. If it's too soon, you may not have enough time to prove your point. If it's too late, you may be getting into a position where people are forgetting about things. That's one possibility. If the employer contests the election in the first place and says, we do not want an election, it goes to a hearing with the National Labor Relations Board, who's going to decide if you're allowed to have an election. At this point, if you're doing the election and everybody's made a decision and is playing nice, great. If the employer is contesting the election, even though they have allowed you to have a ballot, the NLRB gets involved and they have basically an arbitrator come in and decide if you are doing things right, if the union and company are playing by the rules. At this point, and this number 3, the National Labor Relations Board itself will send somebody in to observe the election to make sure there's no tampering, there's no intimidation. If you're literally putting paper votes in a box, they're going to watch you do it to make sure they've got a neutral third party who is watching this unfold. If you have this environment where there is some of this between labor and management, why do we need a neutral third party watching the election? Any ideas? Help me out, guys. Why might you need somebody watching? Yes? Yeah, exactly right. You know, it's like, let's say Emily and Emily and Adam work for me. And here's the voting box. They're coming up to cast their votes. You guys don't want this union, do you? I'm telling you, you don't want this union. You don't want this union. That's intimidation. And so that's why we have a neutral third party who's like, get the hell out of here, Tonka. You can't intimidate people who are voting. At this point, the election has taken place. Here's the rule for election. It is not a majority vote. It is 50% plus one vote. If you get 50% plus one vote, you've got a union. If you get 50% plus one vote the other direction, you do not have a union. And at this point, the union becomes the exclusive bargaining agent. So all collective bargaining goes through that union, and for a period of 1 year, you cannot have another election if you've done things correctly. That's a lot, guys. There's a lot in that process. What questions do you have? Let's go back through a couple of things. If my dad or mom owns the company and I'm a laborer, can I vote in the election? Okay. If I work for the police department or security, can I be in the same union as the rank and file? Absolutely correct. Under the Gasell Doctrine, if I am an employer and if I have created a hostile work environment and have committed unfair labor practices, can a union be forced upon me? Absolutely. The exception to that might be, for example, and I can't actually legally answer this one, but I'll get the answer for you. I would assume the Gasell Doctrine also takes place in right-to-work states, but I can't confirm that. That's a question that just occurred to me in my mind that I have not answered, and I'll have an answer for you on that in the next part of things. Once we've gotten to this point, whether you've gotten too cold, too hot, or just right, at this point, both the union and the company have to be willing to bargain for 1 year and to stick by the terms of an agreement in good faith. If we are acting in good faith, what does that mean? What does it mean to bargain in good faith? Good faith. Come on, guys. What's good faith? Rashawn, if I'm saying, hey, man, I'm coming to you in good faith about this, what does that mean? Exactly. Like if I came over and said, put your drink down for a second. Rashawn, I swear I'm going to grade you fairly. And I look you in the eye and shake your hand firmly. That's good faith. It means I'm giving my part of the bargain to you and your part of the bargain. Companies who don't act in good faith are companies who have no intention of honoring the collective bargaining agreement. And unions who don't operate in good faith are people who basically say, no matter what you give us, we're not going to bargain. We're going to dig in and we're going to get what we want. So that's the difference. I feel like this morning, because we're one day before Halloween, we need a break in class. I'm going to walk around the room today, and what I would like you to do for me is to think about this for a second and tell me either your favorite thing that you ever got for Halloween when you were trick-or-treating or the thing you dreaded getting the most. So, what did you like or what did you dread? What I loved the most at Halloween, when you had that one neighbor who would always give out like full-size candy bars. Like, they're richer than God, and for some reason they're handing out full Hershey bars. And the thing I hated the worst, I think I hate candy corn more than anything. I'm not a fan of candy corn. What do you think? What's your favorite or least favorite?
I was always a big fan of the gummy eyes.
Oh, wow. You're a good neighborhood to go trick-or-treating for handing out that stuff. Nice. Favorite or least favorite?
Least favorite, someone gave me a bag of rocks.
Did somebody really give you rocks?
Someone actually gave me like a bag of rocks.
That's like a Charlie Brown thing.
They put it in a Ziploc bag and gave it to me.
I got a rock. Wow, that sucks, man. That's terrible. Wow. What's your favorite or least favorite?
There was, like, in my town, there's always these people that give out those huge pixie sticks.
Oh, there's like
yeah.
There's like crack for kids. It's like, you know, just put it in the kids and watch them wind up, you know, that's to the big ones.
Yeah, like the really long one.
So all the kids in your block are going on like 4-day sugar benders.
Yeah.
So, do you guys trick-or-treat in Italy?
Yes, like not like here, I think. More like when I was outside.
Mm-hmm. And what was your favorite or least favorite candy or treat you had?
Yeah, like chocolate. Yeah, it's not like any but food.
Can't ever go wrong with chocolate. All right, we're going to move around. What was your favorite or least favorite thing you got?
His favorite was the toothbrush.
Somebody gave you a toothbrush?
Yeah.
Did you guys go back and like egg their house?
No, I know. Some other people have them.
That's just like being a smart ass to hand out toothbrushes on Halloween. What was your favorite or least favorite?
I had this house and I always handed out like king-size bars.
Wow. So like the President of the United States lived in your neighborhood. You're handing out full-size, king-size candy bars. That's awesome. What was your favorite or least favorite?
I don't really remember, but I like Reese's. So I always liked getting Reese's.
You know, 2 years ago they came out with a vending machine, and with a Reese's vending machine, if you got crappy candy, you could take and exchange your candy for Reese's Cups. That's like the best thing ever. What was your favorite or least favorite?
Probably just any of the houses or people that would just give out giant handfuls.
Within an honor system, you take as much as you want.
Well, either that or they actually personally gave it out and they still just gave you big handfuls.
That's awesome. Actually, my wife and I do that. We hardly get any trick-or-treaters, and she buys 4 times as much candy as we actually need. Kids tomorrow night are getting Hershey bars and bags of Lay's chips or something. So, what was your favorite or least favorite?
I hate the people who give out raisins.
Oh.
That's like almost toothbrush.
Raisins.
Yeah,
That
they got
sucks.
little box of the raisins.
I also hated those.
The tiny little boxes.
Yeah.
There's like 2 raisins.
Yeah. These things out, you take them out with your tongue.
Did anyone else get the pretzels that were like shaped like food?
Yeah.
I hated getting that.
Yeah, that's pretty lame. Favorite or least favorite? Pretzels, yeah, pretzels do suck. Although the toothbrush so far takes the cake for me. What was your favorite or least favorite?
Least favorite Tootsie Roll.
You know, it's funny. I had Tootsie Rolls are one of those things I hated from the time I was a kid. And when I worked in a store as a kid, like when I was in high school, you get these boxes of those things at Halloween, and they have like the density of a black hole. Like if you get 4 of those boxes on a dolly and try to pull those up a flight of stairs, that is a core workout. Those things are terrible. What was your favorite or least favorite?
Least favorite was probably like the popcorn balls.
You would take Dr. Pepper.
Yeah, like, that's like, why would you do that?
That's a weird thing.
The outside was good, but the inside sucked.
No, I didn't like it at all.
It would like lacerate the roof of your mouth.
Yeah,
It would be
right.
glass.
That's
I
So,
wouldn't even open it, I just like throw it away.
what was your favorite or least favorite for you?
I'll have to do it, Avery. Those popcorn ball things are the worst adventures.
What do you think, Dora?
Well, my favorite was the one house that gave cans of soda.
Really?
I get a Pepsi and just be like eating candy, drinking Pepsi.
So what was the best or worst?
I really like Kit Kats, but unlike Jared, someone else would give me a toothbrush.
That's horrible. Wow. Did you go trick-or-treating as a kid?
Nope.
What's your favorite or least favorite candy?
Skittles.
Nice. I always liked when I got skills. Those were always good. Yeah, and crazy. Well, anyway, since we had a discussion about Halloween, we gave you a little bit of a break. Let us continue, guys. We had talked before in the just right scenario. Again, just if you're following along here, the scenario we're talking about right now is scenario number 3, if you're following along. An NLRB directive basically means, actually, I'm sorry, because we moved past, we're in scenario 2, I apologize for that. So we're into the too hot scenario. If you've got a group that is issuing such blatant labor violations that a company is making it impossible for organizers to have a fair shot at organizing, you can absolutely issue what they refer to as a Giselle bargaining order, and that means that a union can be basically implemented with no say-so from the employer at all. You can basically automatically ratify a union if enough people have signed their cards. The number, for example, is 30% to be able to go through a traditional election, and it's the same deal here, except they can automatically ratify the union without a secret ballot. When we start talking about the Giselle Doctrine itself, I'm not expecting you to read all this. What it really comes down to is if you had a scenario, for example, where people were supporting the union, people were excited about the union, and the employer had engaged in such tactics that it convinced people to walk away from it, and they were doing so out of intimidation, the Giselle Doctrine basically says you can ratify the union without a secret ballot. So that's really what it comes down to, because the employees had their rights taken away that are supposed to be protected under the National Labor Relations Act. Does that make sense, guys? Because I know there's a lot on this diagram, and we're in that part of this class where there are a lot of either-ors when it comes down to the law. So does the Giselle Doctrine make sense? Okay, I want to make sure. Guys, in terms of, if we go now to scenario number 3, just right. Before you get to the NLRB even being involved, people who are trying to organize the union are talking to their fellow employees and making sure there's actually interest. We call this organizing. So if an organizer is coming in from the outside, or if we've got somebody inside who's soliciting interest, we're basically talking to people. We're having meetings. We're saying, are you interested? We may be setting up a committee and getting what we refer to as authorization cards. And again, the magic number is 30%. We'll be hitting that a couple of times. If you are talking to people about organizing the union, if you're an organizer, some people are going to be for it and some people are going to be against it. What's a reason that somebody might be enthusiastic about the union? If you have somebody who's considering organizing, what's a positive, something they're excited about? What's a benefit to being a part of the union? Yes? Yeah, higher pay is always the biggest one, and better working conditions. So we have this side who gave you two reasons why the people might be excited. If you guys are a union organizer over here, what's a reason people might be opposed to you? What are things they're not going to like? The rank and file. Yes? So we have that idea, you guys are just protecting the slackers, and what else is coming out of your pocket? You got it. So that's the tough sell. Is it worth it? So people are doing a cost-benefit analysis. What are we talking in terms of union dues? How much am I really going to be paying for this protection? If you're telling me you get me $200 extra every paycheck, but I'm paying $175 in union dues every paycheck, is it worth it to me for the extra $25 for the hostility I'm going to endure? That's a very personal choice, and it's a very economic choice to most people. So after we've waged interest, for example, if the employer basically has said, no, we're not going to automatically recognize you like we had in the too cold scenario, the union itself, this is the responsibility of the union. Write this down. It's the responsibility of the union and the organizers. Take notes on this. It's a responsibility of the union and the organizers to petition the NLRB to be able to say we want to hold an election. To be able to hold that election, you've got to show that you've got at least 30% of your rank and file who have signed cards basically saying, yes, we want a union. The magic number, again, is 30%. The NLRB itself is going to say, are you soliciting the right union? Are you pulling the right people in here to represent, and are you representing the right people within your shop? Let me give you an example. Here at St. Francis University, because we're all here, we all understand how our place works. We have a number of types of skills who are represented. We have teachers. We have custodians. We also have people who work in skilled trades. We have carpenters who work here. If we're soliciting, for example, for the National Education Association, does it make sense for them to represent the carpenters here? No, completely different types of labor. If we were putting a solicitation in, and we're saying to the NLRB, we want to hold an election, and we're trying to get a National Education Association to cover the carpenters here, the NLRB is going to come back and say, your solicitation is invalid, you're asking for the wrong union to represent you, somebody at some point has made a bad decision here. Here's an example of what a typical card might look like. So if you're saying, I'm authorizing to be represented by this union, there's your name, your signature. You know, at this point in time, you probably also would have an email address or something like this on there as well. For an employee, why is this something that could feel risky? Yes?
You're basically like fully certifying that you're RPU on
Exactly right. And well, here's my question. Why is a signature something we take so seriously in our society? Why does it mean so much more to us than that they actually read it and signed it? It carries a heaviness, doesn't it? So, for example, if somebody said, yeah, I heard Tonkin was talking bad stuff about our 203 class, and saying bad things about us, versus somebody got a signed affidavit signed Kent P. Tonkin, assistant professor, said these guys didn't like my candy conversation. What carries more weight, the hearsay or the signature? Yeah, because you're basically making a statement and you're putting your name on it. This is a big deal for some people because you're saying to your employer, yes, we want a union here and I'm willing to put my name on it. That's a big step for some people. 30%, yes.
Whenever they do voting for whether they want to do not to,
Typically, we have what we refer to as secret ballot elections, and so typically not. Now, that's an excellent question, though, because in the Obama administration, they were actually trying to roll back rules about secret ballot elections to make it so it could be open and free and face type elections. So let me give you an example. Let's say, for example, in this class, everybody said, hey, we don't want to have our test until 4 weeks from now. And we had a secret ballot. And it turns out, well, about 70% of people, or let's make it closer, 55% of people disagreed with that idea. Versus having to do a show of hands. For the people who wanted the test moved and didn't get their way, which is going to piss them off more? It can make people targets, and it can create divisions within companies. If people don't agree with each other, and you know who you, quote unquote, you know who your friends are, there's no denying it when you have to do it in an open forum. Typically speaking, the NLRB has promoted secret ballot elections. What do you guys think? Do people vote more honestly when it's a secret ballot? I think so. I mean, it's one of these things, even if I have no problem standing behind what I believe, if I'm saying something and I know it would hurt people around me or disappoint them in me, yeah, it weighs on me when I'm making that decision, yes.
I think during the last presidential election, there was like a really high percentage of people who would lie about who they voted for.
What did you say, Elliot?
The exit polls were way off. And exit polls are like when you have that person sitting outside your voting booth and they walk up, you're like, oh yeah, who'd you vote for? And the person says it. Not many people told the truth this time around.
All right, well, let me draw a comparison because I agree with you. Okay, if I ask people, do you give money to charity? Most people are probably going to say yes, whether they do or not. If I ask people, do you pick your nose? Every single person on planet Earth at some point, still as an adult, picks their nose. And nobody is going to say, yeah, I pick my nose. I do it. In fact, I just did it right before I shook your hand. I'm doing it right now. And nobody is going to say that. And I think in the last election, let's just say there was some stigma behind some of the candidates. And I don't think anybody really wanted to be honest about who they voted for. Because I don't think anybody was most people weren't all that happy about voting in the last election. You know, some people who did crazy write-in candidates. They were having a ball. Tell you a true story before we get back into this. My brother-in-law actually got elected constable on a write-in vote. Nobody ran for constable. One person wrote his name in for constable, and he won constable. And it was for Huntington, where Elliot's from. He found out he had to buy his own badge, and he said he wasn't interested. So yes, that write-in stuff, and here's the other thing too. If you really hate your local election board, do write-in candidates because they have to count them. So if those little old ladies who are working there pissed you off for some reason, do a write-in candidate. Just make life terrible for them. So don't beat up little old ladies. There's nothing good about that. Even if they give you popcorn balls. But I digress. You may have noticed I'm promoting this number 30% because I really want you to remember it. You need 30% of people who are interested before you can take a vote to the NLRB for an election. So when you file that petition, the National Labor Relations Board, the employer, and the union are all going to get together and talk about, does this make sense? Are we organizing the right union? Are we organizing the right people? When and how are we going to do this? Are we going to do paper? Are we going to do electronic? What are we going to do? When we get into what we refer to as a consent election, that's a good scenario. Even though the employer did not automatically ratify the union like we have in the too cold scenario, everybody's sort of agreeing, yes, we'll have a fair process here. If we have what we refer to as a contested election, that means the employer is still not buying off on the idea of allowing a union in, so they want to talk to the NLRB. It's a chance to pull people out on technicalities. Let me give you an example. If we've had a union who has solicited the NLRB to have a secret ballot election, let's say, for example, we got 30% of our rank and file to submit membership cards. Well, if the employer really doesn't want a union, they may ask to see a recount on those cards and to verify signatures and all these things, because if it's that close, they may have some leverage to contest the election. So if it's like a landslide, if it's like 70% of people want the vote, you're going to have less of a leg to stand on if you are the union, for example. So if we want to determine if somebody is the right bargaining unit, for example, what we refer to as a community of interest. And what this means, for example, the aspect I mentioned earlier of carpenters being different than teachers, those are clearly different professions. Well, if we have somebody who works as a member of the cleaning staff, and we have somebody who works in Torbian Dining Hall cleaning the kitchen, even though those two people may have different job descriptions, there's some commonality there. There may be a reason why they should both be members of the same collective bargaining unit. And it gets weird too, guys. In Altoona Hospital, for example, UPMC, the folks who work in custodial services, get this, are in the same union as the occupational therapists. They somehow argued that they were both part of the same services type outfit, and they collectively bargained together. What's the problem with that scenario, however? Yes? Completely. And when I say this, I don't mean judgment on anybody who works hard for a living. Typically speaking, the person who's the custodian is maybe not as well educated as the person who's the physical or occupational therapist, and they may have different expectations and different layers of conduct when they are actually bargaining. For example, somebody who is working at a lower rung of pay may have different needs for negotiation. That makes sense, guys? So that can be very challenging. So we're going to be talking about what's in the interest of the employees. For example, if you had a really well-run company where everybody's getting 25% raises every year and everybody's still forming a union, the NLRB may even investigate to say, do these folks really understand what they're asking for? Doesn't mean they're not going to let them organize, but they're going to ask what's in the best interest of the employees. Has there been a prior history of collective bargaining? Have we had unions at this plant before, and how have they worked? What about employees? If employees are being moved from one facility to the next to avoid unionization, well, we may also be saying, well, even though you've got folks in different locations, they should probably all be members of the same unit if they're technically all members of the same company. Remember we talked about the whole concept of double-breasting and alter ego. What did that concept mean, guys? When an employee is attempting to go double-breasted, what are they doing? Anybody remember? Yes?
Is that where they're trying to set up what they're trying to pass off as like a separate company that doesn't need to be
Exactly correct. And so we're also going to be talking about geography, for example. If you've got plants in multiple states, they still could be covered under the same collective bargaining agreement if people are doing the same job in different places. We're also going to be talking in terms of territory, basically how close are the operations. All of these are things that the NLRB is going to look at when they're determining if we've got the appropriate quote-unquote bargaining unit that we're going to be dealing with. So questions so far, guys? Yes, sir.
my one public speaking class this semester, we're watching the movie The Great Debaters. If you're familiar with it.
No, I'm not.
So basically, it follows Wiley College in like the 1930s of like their debate team, and it covers like half the movie. Because the one debate coach, played by Denzel Washington, is also helping like the local farmers to try to unionize. And one of the scenes was that he was talking about compared to like the early 1900s, was that now they have like the NLRB, the AFL, and everything, but the state of Texas, like the law enforcement, does like the dirty work and trying to like shoo them away.
Oh,
so
sure.
like they call them the Texas Rangers and everything like that. And there was this whole big debacle with it. But I found it interesting that they tried, or even with that they couldn't even get the process rolling. So like, do you have a history context of the 1930s on why like the NLRB or any union didn't even come down and challenge what was going on in the South there? Or
I think I'll go back to some of our discussions we had about the United Mine Workers, for example. The idea of owning human beings and keeping them locked in towns wasn't legal in that period of time either. But we also sometimes didn't have awareness of what was happening. And let's be honest, guys, even in 2019, as much as I hate to say it, money talks. And so if you've got rich company owners, for example, who have high levels of advocacy with the government, is it conceivable that they're going to put up roadblocks to the laws being enforced? Yeah. And we're talking about the 1930s, right? You know, when the National Labor Relations Act was even coming into being because of those kinds of abuses of power. So I think it was very common to see people get abused. And even if we get into the 40s and 50s, you know, a lot of people still escape public eye. I believe in this country, and this is something, I know this isn't a civics class, and you guys can feel free to disagree with me or not. I think people who commit the same crime, whether or not you do a long jail sentence, is largely dependent on how wealthy you are and what lawyers you can afford. And so I think that oftentimes in our country, that the rule of law is based more on the dollar than it is the actual principles. I hate to say that, but I think it's the reason we talk about this stuff. And it's also, by the way, I got me off on a tangent. I apologize. I think one of the greatest fears I have as I move into middle age, further into middle age, is to want to see people your age that our government is doing an effective job at making you all disinterested in politics. And I fear that we're going to continue to have old people who are out of touch with the world getting elected into office because the only people who are showing up to vote are old people. That keeps me up. So, sorry for that being a downer. It's not as much fun as talking about popcorn balls. That's always fun. But I really believe that. And I think things like this, like the role of labor and the role of human beings in the workforce, I think you all have more power maybe than you realize you have. Any other questions? I hope one of you guys runs for office sometime. I'd like to vote for somebody over here. So, that being said, let's see where we are here, guys. I think we're going to cover this slide. This is going to be our last slide of the day. In terms of communities of interest, and what we're talking about here is some of the things I was talking about before, guys. If you've got people within your company who do very specific kinds of work that don't match up with the rest of your company, and they're forming a union, it probably has to be their own union, like a craft union. That's a great example. You can, for example, decide if you have something that's so specialized that you don't fit with the rest of the organization, you can choose not to be a part of a union or form your own union. This is, again, a point. The plant guards have to be in a separate bargaining unit because they're supposed to be impartial. So if you've got a company and you've got striking workers, these folks cannot be regarded just as tools of the company. They have to maintain some level of neutrality. There's other specific exclusions, for example. Supervisors can't be part of a union, for example, but also some very specific exemptions, too. If you are an agricultural worker, for example, you cannot be part of a union on site. So let's say, for example, we have a couple of gardens here at St. Francis that people are attending. The folks whose main job is taking care of the agriculture here can't be a member of the same collective bargaining unit for most of the rank and file. They could have their own bargaining unit, but they can't be part of another unit. Agriculture is specifically singled out. And again, If you are a member of the family that owns the plant, you cannot be a member of that labor union either because of an implied conflict of interest. So that being said, guys, I think that's a good place for us to end today. I thank you for your time and attention. Happy Halloween. Hope you get lots of Reese cups. That's a Pennsylvania thing, too, to say a Reese cup.